Hi, everyone, and welcome to No Kill in Motion. I am here today with Alan Rosenberg from the New Jersey Animal Observer, Aubrie Kavanaugh from No Kill Huntsville, and Shirley Marsh from the Biscuit blog. There's something that, well, I've seen it in Colorado, and I think we're seeing it in other places too. Shelters are no longer reporting owner-requested euthanasia. In Colorado, of course, we have PACFA, which actually decides the information we take. And in somewhere between 2018 and 2019, this was eliminated. And I know why it was eliminated, or I'm certain why it was eliminated. It was simply that a lot of the large shelters whose save rates looked terrible because they were doing this wanted to get rid of it. And we've seen a marked increase in the save rate in these shelters simply because they're not counting these animals. Now, owner-requested euthanasia, I think we all know, when somebody comes into a shelter should not be killing any animal that walks in the door that an owner wants killed. They should be actually looking at that individual animal, right? We've talked before about respect for life. That's part of it. And frankly, I don't even know if they should be in that business because of the way that it affects their staff when they're doing that kind of thing. You know, the volume of killing has been studied and what it does to staff. So I think it's a bad idea all around, but we're really talking about eliminating just the numbers and how it actually affects the statistics. So I'm going to start with you, Aubrie. I don't know if you've seen this in any shelters near you, but I know it was happening in Colorado and other places. What do you think?
Well, in my local area, they do count owner-requested euthanasia, and I'm glad they do that because, again, we've talked before that statistics does not a no-kill shelter make. Statistics are an indicator of what is happening, but like when we get statistics from the City of Huntsville City Attorneys every month, there's a form and it includes owner-requested euthanasia, and that lets us get an idea of okay, what's going on. And if that number is super high, then we can make inquiry to the shelter and say, hey, what happened? But when in our area, we focus not on save rate, but we focus on what we call live release rate. I think all four of us focus on that, which is the animals that leave alive. And every animal counts. If you have an animal come in, there's a disposition for that animal going out, whether that animal is leaving alive or not. So you can't just pretend that the animal didn't enter and then exit the system by ignoring that category. So to its credit, the City of Huntsville does include owner-requested euthanasia, and we do include it in our calculations. I know that there's some controversy over whether shelters should be doing this or not, whether they should be providing it as a service. In our area, it is done on case-by-case basis, and more often than not, it's done for low-income residents who can't afford to take their animal to a veterinarian who may charge them $200 or $300 to euthanize their animal. Having said that, though, I think there's probably a workaround for it. The city has money going into a spay and neuter program to help low-income residents. I would much prefer that the city have funds go into a targeted fund so that if someone cannot afford to have their animal euthanized, that rather than bring that animal to the shelter for that process, that they go to a veterinarian. Now, like you said, David, when somebody comes in and says, hey, I want you to euthanize my dog, the shelter's not doing that automatically. There's a dog they're trying to place now where the dog was surrendered with another dog after there had been a dog fight in the neighborhood. Somebody got through a fence, a small dog was killed. And the owner wanted both of the dogs that he surrendered euthanized, and the shelter's not going to do that. I mean, they're looking at the circumstances of what happened. And one of the dogs now, they're trying to market him saying, hey, wasn't his fault. He wasn't the instigator. He just happened to be in the same area, and they're trying to find him a new home. But I think it boils down to, if we're going to talk about live release rate, you can't just pretend that those, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, those animals never existed. You have to include them in the numbers, and you can't just wish them away like they're not part of your operation.
Yeah, and something you said there, I mean, when you're not counting them in the numbers, you might be counting them in the numbers, right? I'm an owner-requested euthanasia, and if the shelter, let's say, performs that act 90% of the time, and 10% they don't, and then they get a live release rate, those animals go into their, and they get a live release. Those animals go into the statistic of how many animals they saved. They didn't even count them coming in. If they do it right, They can easily do that.
Well,
And
and I think too, and one other thing, I'm sorry, I meant to say it, it escaped my brain. I know that there are shelters out there that are bumping these numbers up. We had a conversation, it was sometime last year, maybe a couple years ago, where someone claimed that Michigan was a no-kill state. And Alan, when you and I started looking at the numbers, at some of these shelters, the ORE was through the roof. The ORE was like 25% of their intake, but they weren't counting it because it was ORE. I'm not buying that 25% of the animals coming to your building were brought in by somebody who says, I want you to kill my dog, and you just oblige. I don't believe it.
right, Alan, what do you think?
So yes, so I agree with Aubrie. To your point, Aubrie, I've seen a number. There's a shelter here, David, in your mother's town, Hamilton, where they had regressive shelter management and they were doing OREs like crazy. And after a political upheaval, the shelter management changed and they stopped doing owner-requested euthanasia. And guess what? The live release rate went through the roof because all the owner-requested euthanasia, which was verified by public records requests, was nonsense. They were treatable animals. So that supports the Michigan data that we had looked at a couple of years ago. Really, in regards to this topic, this came up recently when I looked at the shelter animal counts new methodology in 2021 for calculating animal shelter statistics. So if people don't know what shelter animal counts is, shelter animal counts was created almost a decade ago, where they tried to fix the broken former statistical reporting for animal shelters known as the Asilomar Accords. And while I had some criticisms around shelter animal count based on how they charge exorbitant fees for people to access the full data, and that they also made you sign a data usage agreement, which prohibited you from criticizing any of the shelters, they did actually have a good and robust reporting methodology where they counted owner-requested euthanasia. So now in 2021, they removed owner-requested euthanasia from all shelters as long as the shelter provides ORE as a service and the owner intended to euthanize the animal before bringing the animal to the shelter. Well, we all know shelters can easily fudge whether an owner intended to euthanize the animal before or after. We know all the examples of shelters coercing people to allow them to euthanize their animal, sign a form, what have you. So this is really bad because the Asilomar Accords were basically, they didn't count it in the live release rate, but they disclosed it on the face of the statistics. So anyone looking at the statistics could easily recalculate the live release rate the proper way. Here, it's not going to even appear on the face of the intake and outcome statistics. It's only going to appear on what they call this community dashboard. And I've never seen any shelter publish their community dashboard like they publish their statistics now without owner-requested euthanasia. And I don't think it's a coincidence. In 2021, shelters are killing more animals versus 2020 because intake is returning to normal as the pandemic, as the country opens up again. And many members on the Shelter Animal Count Board, David, including the chair, who is a prominent shelter director in Colorado, pro-killing shelter director, are people or from organizations that are pro-killing, including some of the national organizations like HSUS, ASPCA, and the Association of Shelter Vets. So long story short, it looks like the sheltering industry is trying to hide killing again by not reporting owner-requested euthanasia, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm really, really upset that I can't see this data anymore in Colorado because we really do have a robust system. Shirley, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm kind of torn because on the one hand, I tend to agree shelters should not be in the business of killing animals for people who walk in the door and request it. And on the other hand, I understand there are shelters in low income areas. And when you think about someone who has a pet who is suffering and at the end of life and wants to give a humane end, but cannot afford to go to a veterinarian, then I could see how there could be a useful service there for a shelter to offer. But at minimum, they should only be offering it if they have a veterinarian on staff who examines the pet. These are just the same standards as would be found in any vet clinic or vet emergency clinic. And I worry that that doesn't happen necessarily in shelters that offer the owner requested euthanasia. And obviously I worry too that animals are being brought in where the owner requests it, and in fact, the animals could easily be saved, or maybe less than easily, but still they are not at the end of their life. So we talked in another video about respect for life. Well, that's it. You know, evaluating if an animal is truly medically hopeless and suffering, or if they still have some time left.
You make me think, and I think it was everyone was saying something that this just kept coming back in my mind. This is a whole nother subject for another one, but you know, I have a problem with all the veterinarians that are willing to do this if an animal is healthy or treatable, right? Whether it's in a private practice or in a shelter, right? So even if we aren't doing it in the shelter world, we have another subject we have to get to sooner or later, is that vets shouldn't do this. I mean, if you read the veterinarian's oath, it's very similar to the human oath. When I interpret it, I always look at them like, they can't kill a healthy or treatable animal according to this oath. It's the strangest thing. Well, that's all the time we have. We're going to get off. Thank you for joining us today. Aubrie Kavanaugh from No Kill Huntsville, Alan Rosenberg from New Jersey Animal Observer, Shirley Marsh from Yes Biscuit blog. I'm David Smith from No Kill Colorado. We will see you next time.